Your role is no longer essential. Clear your desk by end of day. I read the email 3 times before it sank in. Helen Fraser, Chief Operating Officer at Veltrix Optics, had just fired me through Microsoft Outlook. No meeting, no explanation. Just a corporate death sentence delivered at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. My name is Marcus Ellison. I am 46 years old, and I had spent the last 12 years building the cybersecurity infrastructure at Veltrix from the ground up. When I started, they were running systems so outdated that a high school kid could have hacked their client database with a laptop and basic knowledge of SQL injection. I changed all that. Every firewall, every encryption protocol, every backup system, I designed it, implemented it, and maintained it. The thing that bothered me most was not the firing itself. In corporate America, loyalty flows one direction, and it is not toward the employee. What bothered me was the timing. 3 weeks earlier, I had received my annual performance review. Exceeds expectations in all categories. Helen had personally signed off on my merit increase and told me the company valued my contributions. Now, apparently, my contributions were no longer essential. I sat in my office, my former office, staring at the email. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the same lights I had worked under during countless late nights when systems crashed, or when we faced security threats. I had missed my daughter Sophia's soccer games to be here. I had skipped family dinners when the network went down. I had built my entire professional identity around keeping Veltrix Optics secure and operational. The irony was not lost on me. As head of cybersecurity, I knew exactly how vulnerable the company was without me. Not because I was irreplaceable as a person, but because I was the only one who understood the architecture I had built. The custom configurations, the administrative passwords, the fail-safe protocols. They were all locked behind access credentials that only I possessed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my personal notebook. Every IT professional keeps one. Inside were handwritten notes, network diagrams, and most importantly, a list of administrative passwords that I had never shared with anyone. Company policy required documentation of all access credentials, but some things you keep to yourself, especially when you do not trust your employer to treat you with basic human decency. Helen Fraser had made a mistake. She thought she could discard me like outdated hardware. She forgot that when you fire the person who built your digital foundation, you better make sure you have the blueprints. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my briefcase. For the first time since reading her email, I smiled. 12 years ago, Veltrix Optics was hemorrhaging money due to data breaches and system failures. Their previous IT department consisted of 2 guys who treated cybersecurity like it was optional. When hackers compromised their client database and leaked sensitive information about government defense contracts, the company nearly folded. That is when they hired me. I came from a smaller firm in Columbus, Ohio, where I had built a reputation for creating secure, scalable networks. Veltrix offered me twice my salary and complete autonomy over their technology infrastructure. Helen Fraser, who was vice president of operations at the time, personally recruited me. She promised me a partnership role within 5 years and told me I would be the cornerstone of their digital transformation. I believed her. More importantly, I trusted her. For the first 8 years, everything Helen promised came true. I rebuilt their entire network from scratch, implemented military-grade encryption, and created redundant backup systems that could withstand natural disasters. When other companies in Kansas City were getting hacked left and right, Veltrix remained untouchable. Our clients trusted us with classified information because they knew their data was safe. Helen and I worked closely during those early years. She understood technology enough to give me the resources I needed, and I respected her business acumen. When she was promoted to Chief Operating Officer 4 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. I thought we were partners building something lasting together. The first crack appeared 6 months ago. Helen hired a new IT manager named Trevor Walsh without consulting me. Trevor was 28 years old, fresh out of business school, with minimal technical experience. He had been tasked with modernizing our technology processes and improving cost efficiency. I knew exactly what that meant. They were looking for ways to cut expenses, and veteran employees with high salaries are always the first targets. Trevor started asking questions about our systems. He wanted documentation for everything: network configurations, security protocols, administrative access procedures. I gave him the standard documentation, but I kept the critical details to myself. Something about him bothered me. He talked about technology like it was just another line item in a budget spreadsheet. 3 months ago, I overheard Trevor talking to Helen about redundancy in the IT department. He suggested that many of my responsibilities could be handled by junior technicians at a fraction of the cost. Helen asked him if he was confident about maintaining security without me. Trevor assured her that modern cybersecurity was mostly automated anyway. That conversation should have been my warning. I should have started looking for another job. Instead, I assumed that Helen would remember everything I had done for the company. I assumed that 12 years of loyalty and excellence would count for something. I was wrong. The email arrived while I was reviewing firewall logs from the previous night. A routine task I had performed thousands of times, looking for any anomalies that might indicate security threats. The subject line read, "Employment termination, immediate. No dear Marcus or thank you for your service. Just corporate efficiency at its coldest." I called Helen's office immediately. Her assistant Patricia answered with forced cheerfulness. "Helen Fraser's office, this is Patricia." "Patricia, this is Marcus. I need to speak with Helen about the email I just received." A pause. "I am sorry, Marcus, but Mrs. Fraser is in meetings all day. She asked me to tell you that Human Resources will contact you about the transition process." "Transition process?" "Your replacement orientation begins next week. Trevor Walsh will be assuming your responsibilities." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at my computer screen. Trevor Walsh. The business school graduate who thought cybersecurity was just another software package you could buy off the shelf. Helen was handing over 12 years of my work to someone who probably could not configure a basic router without calling technical support. I walked to the break room to get coffee, hoping the familiar routine would help me process what was happening. Instead, I found Trevor standing by the coffee machine, talking quietly with 2 junior technicians I had trained. They stopped talking when they saw me. "Morning, Marcus," Trevor said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "How are things going?" "Just great," I replied. "Congratulations on your promotion." He looked genuinely surprised. "How did you know?" The technicians exchanged glances and quickly left the break room. Trevor had not expected me to find out so soon. He probably thought Helen would break the news to me in person, maybe with some explanation about budget cuts or restructuring. He did not realize that Helen had chosen the coward's way out. "Trevor," I said, pouring coffee into my mug, "have you ever heard the phrase single point of failure?" "Sure. It is when a system depends too heavily on one component." "Exactly. And what happens when that component fails?" "The whole system goes down." He paused. "Why do you ask?" I smiled and walked back to my office without answering. Trevor Walsh was about to learn that cybersecurity was not just about buying software packages. He was about to discover that when you fire the person who built your digital infrastructure, you better make sure you can actually run it without them. I had been loyal to Veltrix Optics for 12 years. I had protected their data, secured their networks, and kept their business running smoothly through countless crises. Helen Fraser had repaid that loyalty by throwing me away like obsolete equipment. Now it was time to show them exactly how essential my role really was. I spent the rest of Tuesday morning cleaning out my desk while planning my next move. The security cameras in my office were recording everything, so I made sure to appear professional and compliant. I packed my personal items, printed out a few documents I would need for my transition meeting with Human Resources, and prepared to leave quietly. But I had one final task to complete. At 11:30 a.m., I logged into the primary server using my administrative credentials. Every system at Veltrix Optics ran through this central hub: email servers, client databases, financial records, backup systems, everything. I navigated to the system configuration panel and accessed the automated maintenance protocols I had programmed years earlier. Every network administrator builds failsafes into their systems. These are emergency procedures designed to protect data during catastrophic failures or security breaches. If someone tried to hack our network, for example, certain systems would automatically shut down to prevent data theft. If a natural disaster damaged our primary servers, backup protocols would activate to preserve critical files. I had programmed one additional failsafe that I had never documented in any official capacity. If someone attempted to access the system configuration without proper authentication protocols that only I knew, the entire network would initiate a controlled shutdown. Not a crash, not data deletion, just a systematic pause that would require administrative reset to restore functionality. The beautiful thing about this particular failsafe was that it looked completely legitimate. The system would display standard maintenance messages. Users would assume that routine updates were being performed. Nobody would suspect sabotage because the shutdown process followed proper technical procedures. I initiated the sequence with a 72-hour delay. The system would continue operating normally until Friday at 2 p.m., giving me time to be long gone before anyone realized what had happened. More importantly, the delay would occur during peak business hours, when clients would be trying to access their accounts and process critical transactions. At noon, I walked to Human Resources to meet with Janet Morrison, the director who handled employee terminations. Janet was professional but sympathetic. She explained my severance package, discussed health insurance continuation, and asked if I had any questions about the transition process. "When does Trevor officially take over my responsibilities?" I asked. "Monday morning. He's been reviewing your documentation all week to prepare." I almost laughed. Trevor had been reviewing the basic documentation I provided to all junior staff members. He had no access to the specialized knowledge required to actually manage our security infrastructure. Helen and Trevor apparently believed that cybersecurity was like changing the oil in a car. Any qualified technician could handle it with the right manual. "Will Trevor have administrative access to all systems?" I asked. "That is being arranged," Janet replied. "Mr. Walsh requested a complete transfer of your credentials by Friday afternoon." Perfect timing. By Friday afternoon, Trevor would have my old passwords, but the systems would be locked in maintenance mode. He would spend the weekend trying to figure out what went wrong, probably assuming that I had made some kind of mistake before leaving. I signed the termination paperwork and handed Janet my company laptop, my access badge, and my parking pass. Everything had to appear normal. I shook her hand, thanked her for her professionalism, and walked out of Veltrix Optics for what I assumed would be the last time. That afternoon, I drove home to my house in Lee's Summit and told my wife Isabella what had happened. She was furious, not just about the firing, but about the disrespectful way Helen had handled it. Isabella worked as a project manager for a construction company, and she understood the value of institutional knowledge. She knew that replacing an experienced employee was never as simple as corporate executives pretended. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Wait," I said, "and see if they realize their mistake." I spent Thursday and Friday updating my resume and reaching out to former colleagues at other companies. Several firms in Kansas City were hiring senior cybersecurity professionals. The job market was strong, and my reputation in the industry was solid. I would be fine professionally. But I wanted more than just a new job. I wanted Helen Fraser and Trevor Walsh to understand the consequences of their decision. Friday afternoon at exactly 2 p.m., while I was sitting in my home office reviewing job postings, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Veltrix Optics' main number. "Marcus, this is Trevor. We are having some issues with the network. Can you walk me through the reset procedures?" I had been expecting this call, but I was surprised it came so quickly. Trevor's voice carried a note of panic that he was trying to hide behind professional courtesy. "What kind of issues?" I asked. "The system initiated some kind of automatic maintenance mode. All the internal applications are showing temporary service unavailable messages. I tried using the administrative passwords you documented, but nothing is working." "That sounds like the emergency failsafe protocol. It activates when the system detects potential security threats." "How do I turn it off?" I paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to make Trevor uncomfortable. "The reset procedure is not documented. It requires manual configuration of the primary server. Can you walk me through it over the phone? Trevor, I do not work for Veltrix Optics anymore. Helen Fraser made that very clear on Tuesday. Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, people talking rapidly with obvious stress. Marcus, I know the situation is awkward, but we really need your help. This is affecting our clients. I understand. Have you tried calling the software vendor for technical support? They said this looks like a custom configuration that they cannot troubleshoot remotely. Of course they did. Every piece of our security infrastructure had been customized specifically for Veltrix's needs. The off-the-shelf documentation would be useless for resolving this particular issue. I'm sorry, Trevor, but I cannot provide technical support for systems I no longer have authorized access to. That would violate company security policies. What if we brought you back as a consultant, just temporarily to fix this issue? Now we were getting somewhere. I would need to speak with Helen about the terms of any consulting arrangement. She is in meetings with the executive team right now. Let me get back to you. The line went dead. I checked the time. 2:47 p.m. on Friday afternoon. The Veltrix Optics network had been down for 47 minutes during peak business hours. Their clients could not access account information. Their sales team could not process orders. Their financial systems were inaccessible. Every minute of downtime was costing them money and damaging their reputation with clients. In the cybersecurity industry, reliability is everything. If clients cannot trust you to keep your own systems running, why would they trust you to protect their data? My phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time, it was Helen Fraser. Marcus, we need to talk. Her voice was different now. Gone was the cold corporate efficiency from Tuesday's email. She sounded stressed, maybe even desperate. Hello, Helen. I heard you are having some technical difficulties. Our entire network is down. Trevor says you are the only one who can fix it. That is unfortunate. When did this start? About an hour ago. The system just shut itself down with no warning. I knew exactly when it started, down to the minute, because I had programmed the timing myself. But Helen did not need to know that. These things happen with complex systems, I said. Have you considered calling in an outside IT consulting firm? Marcus, stop playing games. What will it take to get you back here to fix this? I am not playing games, Helen. You terminated my employment on Tuesday. I am simply no longer responsible for your technology problems. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before she spoke again. Name your price. I do not work by the hour anymore, I told Helen. I work on retainer contracts. What does that mean? It means you pay me a monthly fee for ongoing consulting services. If you need me to solve a crisis, I am available. If your systems run smoothly, you still pay the retainer. I could hear Helen breathing heavily on the other end of the line. In the background, voices were getting louder and more agitated. Someone was talking about calling clients to explain the service outage. How much? She asked. $50,000 per month with a 6-month minimum contract, plus a one-time emergency service fee of $25,000 to resolve your current crisis. That is ridiculous. You were making $8,000 a month as a full-time employee. That was before you decided my role was no longer essential. Market rates for emergency cybersecurity consulting are considerably higher than staff salaries. Helen was quiet for a moment. I knew she was doing the math. $300,000 for 6 months of consulting plus $25,000 for the immediate fix. It was more than 3 times what they had been paying me annually as a full-time employee. I need to discuss this with the executive team, she said. Of course. But Helen, you should know that every minute your network stays down is costing you credibility with your clients. Defense contractors do not like service interruptions when they are dealing with classified information. That was the key point. Veltrix Optics had built their reputation on reliability and security. A prolonged network outage would not just cost them money in the short term. It would damage their relationships with high-value government clients who demanded perfect uptime. How long will it take you to fix this if we agree to your terms? Assuming I can get physical access to the server room, probably about 2 hours. 2 hours? Trevor has been working on this all afternoon. Trevor does not have the specialized knowledge required for this particular issue, but I am sure he is doing his best. Helen ended the call without saying goodbye. I spent the next hour preparing my consulting contract and thinking about how I wanted to structure my new relationship with Veltrix Optics. They had treated me like a disposable employee. Now they would pay premium rates for my expertise. My phone rang at 4:15 p.m. "We accept your terms," Helen said. "How quickly can you get here?" "I can be there by 5 p.m. I will need a signed contract and a check for the emergency service fee before I start work." "Fine. Janet Morrison is preparing the paperwork now." When I arrived at Veltrix Optics, the parking lot was fuller than usual for a Friday evening. Through the windows, I could see people at their desks looking frustrated and anxious. The reception area, normally bustling with activity, was eerily quiet. Janet Morrison met me in the lobby with a contract and a cashier's check for $25,000. I reviewed the paperwork carefully, signed it, and deposited the check using my phone's mobile banking app. "Trevor is waiting for you in the server room," Janet said. I found Trevor standing in front of the primary server rack, staring at diagnostic screens with obvious confusion. When he saw me, his expression mixed relief with embarrassment. "Thank God you are here," he said. "I have been trying everything, but nothing works." "Sometimes these systems develop complex problems," I said, sitting down at the administrative console. "Let me see what I can do." I logged in using credentials that I had never shared with anyone, navigated to the system configuration panel, and disabled the maintenance protocol with a few keystrokes. Within minutes, all systems were back online. "How did you do that?" Trevor asked. "Experience," I said, standing up and closing my laptop. 12 years of experience. 6 months later, my consulting retainer with Veltrix Optics expired and I chose not to renew it. By then, I had used the income to establish my own cybersecurity firm, Ellison Defense Systems, with offices in Kansas City and contracts with 3 major corporations who had grown tired of dealing with larger, less responsive consulting companies. Helen Fraser called me personally to negotiate a renewal of our consulting agreement. "Marcus, we need you to continue providing support for our systems. Trevor has learned a lot, but he still needs guidance on the more complex issues." "I appreciate the offer, Helen, but I am focused on growing my own business now. I have several new clients who require my full attention." "We can increase the retainer fee. What would it take to keep you available?" "It is not about money anymore. I have decided to work exclusively with clients who value long-term partnerships over short-term cost savings." There was a long pause before Helen spoke again. "You are still angry about how we handled your termination." "I am not angry, Helen. I am grateful. Being fired was the best thing that ever happened to my career." That was the truth. Helen's decision to terminate my employment had forced me to take a risk I might never have taken otherwise. Instead of remaining a comfortable but underpaid employee, I had become an independent entrepreneur with complete control over my professional destiny. "What about our ongoing security needs?" Helen asked. "You know our systems better than anyone. I recommend you hire a qualified cybersecurity consulting firm. There are several good ones in Kansas City. But none of them know our specific configuration." "That is true. The knowledge transfer might take some time and it will probably be expensive, but I am sure you will figure it out." Helen was quiet for a moment. I could hear the frustration in her breathing. "This feels like revenge, Marcus." "No, Helen. Revenge would be unprofessional. This is just business." 2 weeks after I declined to renew my consulting contract with Veltrix Optics, I received a call from Patricia, Helen's former assistant. She had found a new job and wanted to share some information about what had happened after I left. "Helen was fired last month," Patricia told me. "The board blamed her for the network crisis and the expensive consulting fees. They said she showed poor judgment in terminating critical personnel without proper succession planning." I was not surprised. Corporate executives who create expensive problems rarely survive long in their positions, especially when those problems could have been easily avoided. "What about Trevor?" I asked. "He was demoted back to junior IT support. They hired an outside firm to manage cybersecurity, but the transition has been difficult. Several clients have complained about service issues." That was predictable. Institutional knowledge is not easily replaced, and complex systems do not transfer seamlessly from one administrator to another. Veltrix Optics would eventually stabilize their operations, but it would take time and cost them significantly more than they had been paying me as a full-time employee. The irony was perfect. Helen Fraser had fired me to save money and had ended up costing her company hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees, lost productivity, and client dissatisfaction. Her decision to treat me as disposable had ultimately made her the disposable one. I hung up the phone and returned to work on a security proposal for a new client. My business was growing steadily, and I was earning more money as an independent consultant than I had ever made as an employee. More importantly, I was working with clients who understood the value of expertise and treated their technology professionals with respect. Helen Fraser had taught me an important lesson about corporate loyalty. She just had not intended for me to learn it at her expense. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming too successful to care about the people who underestimated you. Within a year of my departure, Veltrix Optics had spent more on cybersecurity consulting than they would have paid me in 5 years of employment. Helen Fraser found work at a smaller firm where her cost-cutting strategies were less likely to backfire spectacularly. Trevor Walsh eventually left the technology industry altogether and became a sales representative for office equipment. As for me, I learned that sometimes being fired is just the push you need to realize your own worth.